1010 WOLB Baltimore and WERQ FM. HD3 Baltimore.
The views and opinions of the guest and host you hear are not necessarily those of the staff and management of Radio 1, its sponsors, or advertisers.
Welcome to the Our Legacy Matters show, where we'll discuss how to secure, maintain, and transfer wealth to future generations. I am your host, Attorney Sherry Fleming. Now let's tune in. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for listening to the Our Legacy Matters show. This is Sherry Fleming. Again, I am a Maryland state licensed attorney, but I am not your attorney. So I hope that you will seek any professional advice from anything that you hear on this show today. So I am conflicted with all of the emotion today. I have my favorite person, my husband, in the studio today. You gonna say hi to the people, Charles?
Hello, world. How y'all doing?
And so this is going to be interesting. He's on the show today. I don't know if this was accident or coincidence. I'm going to go ahead and say it was coincidence. Today happens to be 4 months since I lost my mom tragically and unexpectedly in a car accident. And so I knew the show was today. I knew it was live. And I'm like, what are you going to be feeling today? What are you going to talk about today? And so for today, I decided to talk about estate administration. What that is. Essentially, estate administration is the process of transferring one's assets from a deceased person to that of a beneficiary. And I wanted to talk about that today just because it's a process that I've walked through with many, and one that I've had to walk through in doing my mom's estate. We're about 90% of the way done. But I wanted to mention it because today is what it is. Also, we often talk about generational wealth planning and transfer of generational wealth, which is a thing to be honored, an act to be admired. But what we don't talk about, and what I don't hear people mentioning, is the trauma associated with inheritance and what it is like to be on the receiving end. And you're going to have grief whether or not you receive assets or income or property. But what does it feel like, and what is it to actually inherit, and what do you do with it? And so I'm going to just recap to talk about the places where inheritance could happen that we discussed over the past couple of weeks. And so I have mentioned retirement plan assets, insurance assets, which are contracts where the asset transfers by operation of contract. So if you name a beneficiary, or your loved one has named you as a beneficiary to a particular asset, that will automatically transfer. And so estate administration means that there is a process once someone has transitioned that must take place in order for that asset to transfer. So in my case, my mother both had retirement plan benefits and insurance benefits, and there's a process. There's paperwork that must be filled out. There's death certificates that must be certified, particularly if you're functioning with organizations that are out of state, and that requires work. If you're receiving property as a result of joint ownership, there isn't anything much for you to do because it transfers automatically to the joint owner once one of the joint owners transition. Then we have assets that may not pass through operation of law or contract, but that have to go through probate. So if an individual dies with a will, the will is probated without regard to the assets that they actually have. If an individual dies without a will, in order to transfer assets, you need court authorization, and that is the probate process. And so during the course of these weeks, we've also talked about trust and the benefits of trust, but there is also an administration to a trust, meaning that someone you put in charge, that trustee, still has to go through the process of making sure that the beneficiaries named within the trust receive those assets. And so I want to just really highlight that because I don't know that it is a common understanding understanding of how much work actually goes into transferring assets and administering someone's estate. And that's I've talked about the technical work, but I haven't talked about the emotional transfer, the weight that has to be lifted to do the work while also grieving. And I know in one of the sessions I briefly mentioned an institutional trustee, and that's having an organization to serve as trustee. Most of the time, most people who have trust, they have a person that is doing the trust administration. And so it becomes very important that if you have a trust, you name a trustee. If you have a will, you name a personal representative, someone who will have the wherewithal to actually do the work associated with transferring your estate. And so if you have a family member and you're naming a family member, are you having discussions with this person for them to know that you're putting them in charge? Will they be up to the task when the time arrives for them to actually do the job? And so, in my situation, there really wasn't anyone else. I am my mother's only child. I am her only heir at law. My mother did not have a will. So for those of you who are just like, oh my gosh, you're an estate planning attorney. I know everyone around you has, everything in place. They have everything buttoned up. She did not. However, I can honestly say that there wasn't too much hardship in transferring her assets just because it was just me. And so in my case, I'm the only one. Yes, I could have tapped on, the shoulders of many friends, but this is a process that I wanted to walk through both personally and professionally that I wanted to do on my own. And so I did. My husband is here. We actually lost his dad about 2 years. What is this? About 2.5, almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years at the end of this year, where we had to walk through this process a little bit more seamlessly, but maybe not. But it was still an emotional lift. I have clients who I help administer their loved one's estate. I'm thinking about a couple of clients where they have joint ownership of bank accounts with hundreds of thousands of dollars in this bank account that for years now they have not touched, they have not spent, they have access to. It is theirs, but because it is the inheritance that was left to them, they are still struggling with grief and not really sure what to do. I have clients who have taken years to probate an estate of a loved one just because it requires work and it can be quite traumatic. And so I just want us to think and consider, for those of us who are planning, who would we want to serve in these roles and whether or not they have the capacity to serve in the role. And for those of us who envision ourselves serving in these roles, what type of support do you think that you'll need to serve in these roles? Again, this is just conversational. And so, Charles, you have anything you want to bring to the table?
Nah, you flowing. You good.
And so I want to, again, highlight this because Charles and I were talking earlier about someone that we both know who transitioned at least 4 years ago, who owned real estate and didn't have the opportunity to create a plan the way that it should have been created due to illness and due to death, whose property is really just sitting. It's sitting. It's not moving. There isn't anyone who desires to do the work. And that's what estate administration is. It is the work behind the transition. And this particular individual, I do not believe that they would have envisioned this, where they have children, they have people who could benefit from the assets that belong to them, but they don't have anyone willing to say, you know what, now is the time for me to kind of step up and do the work to make it happen, even if they have someone walking alongside of them. So for those of you who are listening, who are thinking about planning, that is what I want you to think about when selecting those individuals and have conversations with them. And so you have the technical part of estate administration, which is doing the work. Okay, so what does doing the work mean? I actually just heard someone in my head ask that question. So my mother was a resident of South Carolina. I am a resident of Maryland. We already have an issue because we have distance, right? So doing the work in probating her estate, actually the first thing I did was contact the South Carolina attorney because I was just like, I don't have the bandwidth for this. And the attorney, who is a colleague that I know of, pretty much said, I believe you can do this. You know, her estate wasn't, South Carolina is different. This is also a point that I want to re-highlight in a practical way. I always say, make sure that you are aware of what is required in a jurisdiction where you have assets. And so my mother was a resident of South Carolina. That's where her assets were. And in South Carolina, their probate, if you don't own real estate, they're like, okay. And it's not high valued estate. They're like, okay, whatever. Just tell us what you own. We'll give you a court order to move on, which to me was very, very convenient because my mother did not own real estate in South Carolina. But I got the feeling that if she did, it would be a whole heck of a lot more complicated. So essentially, in contacting that attorney, she basically was like, I don't want to take your money to do this, which is something that I found myself saying to people as well, just because we happen to be decent-hearted people. Also knowing she knew that I possibly had the bandwidth to do the paperwork and that I could do the paperwork. And so the next step was essentially to find out the process. And I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't do that step. That was way too much for me to do. I had my aunt that pretty much helped me. My former paralegal jumped in and said, I did the research. Here's what you need to do. Here's the paperwork. And I want you to realize that even me, even someone who does this for other people on a regular basis, that when it came to my parent, I was not able to do the initial investigation into what it took to actually administer her estate. It was just too much too soon. And that is what I find. It's not that it was hard to discover, but it was just too much of a weight to bear too soon. But also in the back of my mind, I understand that there are clocks that are ticking. There are things that must occur in a specific amount of time if I want to receive the benefit of certain things. And so I had that support of two people. Again, my aunt has been a legal secretary all of my life. So she jumped right in saying, here's what you need to do. My paralegal jumped in, here's what you need to do. And so I did it. And again, I think it might have still took me a long time to complete the paperwork because there is trauma in continuing to write someone's name, deceased. There is trauma in continuing to sign your name as executor and not child, or executor in that state and not child. There is trauma behind that. There is trauma in filling out a claim form for insurance and having to fill out a form. My mother, in her infinite wisdom, left a policy to me and my 3 children. Their children. So who's their guardian? Me and their father. And could I have had Charles sign the papers on behalf of the children? Yes. But I was already signing as a beneficiary. So there's trauma signing for myself as a beneficiary and then signing for each child and identifying each birth certificate to show that I am their parent so that they can receive. And that is the work that goes into the easiest of things. Again, I'm talking about retirement. I'm talking about life insurance. These are the easiest things to transfer. In one of the prior episodes, I talked about liquid assets and illiquid assets. Liquid assets being those assets that pour like liquid, that transfer like liquid from cup to cup. Retirement and insurance being one of the two of the easier transferable assets. All I have to do is complete a form and provide supporting documentation, my birth certificate, that of my children. And that is still work that needs to be done. Not a lot of work, but depending on who it is, it can be a heavy lift. And the question becomes, who will help you lift it? Who will help you carry it? Do you have those people identified? I don't want any of my listeners to be blind in what is inevitable. Death is inevitable. It's coming for every last one of us. It is something I say so with a sober mind. I think I have to tell myself every day, I go, oh snap, my mother died. And it is because it is almost as if I'm pinching myself to create the reality that it has happened and I can't do anything about it. However, what I can do is what I know to do, and that is to begin the steps to transfer her estate, as well as help people through that process.
Can I chime in real quick? How you doing, everybody? Hope everyone's good out there. Sherry just mentioned something that's very important. Trauma requires a team, right? You need a supporting team. Like she just said, death is not easy, but I truly believe having a team in place, even with the legalities, making sure you have those individuals identified to assist with the legal stuff, but also there's a human factor, right? And it's important that we also have a team of support, as Sherry just mentioned, a support team to help you through your trauma, not to push too hard, but understanding there are papers that need to be signed. There are things that have to be done, and having a good team in place that will give you space to process, but also ensure that you handle business is very, very important. So make sure you have a solid team around you for these life happenings, if you will. Go ahead. I'll be quiet now.
Go ahead, teammate.
Okay, right. Teamwork make the dream work.
And he doesn't want me to say that. I'm not going to say it. I already told the people. So
you can say it.
My husband is a pastor. He pastors. Well, he has been.
I didn't ask you to say that part.
Pastoring me through this. And I laugh and I find humor in it because we are often told that we're not the most emotional people. And that's not true. We are very emotional. I think that the thing that we have in common is that we're both realistic about the moment and what needs to be done. I'm more of the taskmaster who creates the list that of the things that has to be checked off. And he has this amazing heart for people when they're going through their toughest times. And so together we work well in that. And so who's on your team? Who's the coach? I was going to go down this in sports analogy, but I actually don't even know sports enough to go through it. But who is on your team? I know for me, having, like I already mentioned, my aunt, and not just having people who love you, but people who also know what to do, right? So I mentioned my aunt and my paralegal, both who love me enormously and tremendously. Their love for me is great. But they were, again, here's the things on the list, right? right? Then I have one of my closest friends I call the Weeping Willow. I'm not going to say her name because she just cries at any given time. She gives me emotional balance. And, you know, she's on my team to tell me to be present, to be in my tears. It's okay. I cry in my car every single morning. I talk to my therapist about why the car. I don't really know why. I think it's because it's the place I can't move. But I'm in that car crying every single morning, being present with myself. And that's her role on the team. My husband plays many roles, particularly his presence today is invaluable to me. I don't even really have the words for it. And so who's on your team? Who do you have? That one will administer the estate, but if you are the person who's going to be in a place of administration, what support do you have to do that? Go ahead. Also,
with this team analogy, you have to know yourself, right? You have to know your strengths and weaknesses. You can be one who tends to procrastinate, and in these traumatic experiences, it's easy for us to fall into those spaces where we avoid in order to process through. So knowing yourself, even when my dad transitioned, knowing myself, and I'm one to avoid in certain spaces just to allow myself to process, ensuring that you know that about yourself and your team knows, because there are things that have to be done in a timely manner, and to make sure you know yourself and your team knows you, because they know to give you space to process. They know how you handle certain things, and being honest with yourself in those moments to be able to hand certain things off to your team in order to get what you need out of the process, out of whatever your loved one has left over for you, is very important.
To thine own self be true. That's one of my favorite quotes. So in our last couple of minutes here, I want to leave you with this. For those who are planning, leave instructions.
Yes.
Leave instructions, not just the estate planning documents, not just the trust, not just the will, not just, you know, those documents that tell the world what you want to happen with your belongings, but leave instructions as to what type of life do you envision for the people that you are leaving here. And for those of you who are on the receiving end, I hope that you receive instruction, or that you walk close enough with someone to have a knowing of what it is that they would want you to do with the assets that you received. And one of the greatest gifts, let me say this. My mother did leave an inheritance, but I don't want y'all out here thinking that we out here swimming in money like Scrooge McDuck. We not. Okay, we're not. we are making it work. We have 3 children, and that's where these funds are going to go to. That's the bottom line. But outside of that, the funds, the greatest gift that she's left me were her journals and her accidental writings. My mother had, she would get up in the morning and she would listen to the Steve Harvey morning show. It didn't matter if it wasn't on the radio where she would live stream. And she would listen to gospel music, sing really loudly and annoyingly, and she would write. She would write her thoughts. She would pray. Some things are in actual journals. Some things are on a whole bunch of sticky notes and in random books, but everything had a date at the top. And so I am blessed to have those things from her, because it gave me insight into the heart of her that I did not always get to see. My mother was very transparent like myself, but the heart of her I didn't always get to see. I can read her worry. I can read her praise. I can read her adoration. I could read her the goals that she had for herself. She had so many goals. My mother was only 60, and there were a lot of things she wanted to do and was on path to do with her life. And so those journals that I have, they give me insight as to how to honor her and what to do. I consider those journals to be instruction. And again, I haven't looked through them all. Actually, the only time I looked through them is when I had to clean out her residence. Yes, the work of administration. I had to fly to South Carolina for several days, clean out her residence, decide what I want to take, decide what I wanted to give away, decide what was going to be in the trash. I did that with my aunt. That was work, and it was an emotional lift. Okay, so I just wanted to also add that in as the work. So I read some of the journals at that point. My aunt, bless her heart. That's all she did. That's all she got the packing probably on day 2 and day 3. But that first day, she didn't do any work. She just read through all of the things.
Her work was presence.
Her work was presence and tears and walking around in my mother's coat in 70 degrees in South Carolina. But
work looks different for everybody.
So she definitely read them. I didn't get a chance to read them all just because it's difficult, quite frankly. And so that's my work moving forward, figuring out, the best way to honor her with the instructions that she left. And when you are leaving instructions, I'll say this until I'm blue in the face. Have conversation. Make conversation about your legacy a regular thing. Don't wait until you're on your deathbed. Don't wait until it's the last minute. Don't wait until you're towards the end of life to tell people things. Have conversation now about the things that matter to you and what your expectation is of them. Have those conversations. Anything you want to add?
We're all journeying through life together. As individuals and as humanity, as a group of people. I think that work has to be done on both ends, right? You have to put the work in prior setting up wills, trust, all that legal stuff that I have no idea what the proper terms are, but making sure that work is done in order to make the work that has to be executed after you transition easy for those family members, your offspring, your siblings, whomever you have identified as the ones to carry out your will and your desires, making sure that the work for them beyond the emotional piece, the legal work is easy as well. So yes, it's hard to have these conversations, but if you add a little levity to it, I think that's the proper term.
Go ahead, vocabulary.
I have words too. Making sure that the work is done in the beginning is important, and then afterwards, the work for those family members will be easier. But that's all I have.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Charles. Thank you for being here with me. No, this is not Charles from episode 1. This is my husband, Charles, who's a different Charles. I probably am going to cry a hard cry after this episode, but I thank you for joining me, and I hope that you can join me again next week. Remember to go to sherryfleming.com/Our Legacy Matters for more information. Look forward to speaking with you again soon. Have a great week.
Later.
Thanks for listening to the Our Legacy Matters show. Connect with me, Attorney Sherry Fleming, at I Am Sherry Fleming on all social media platforms or at sherryfleming.com/Our Legacy Matters, or you can call us at 410-316-6800. Make sure you tune in next week for another discussion because our legacy matters.
The new 1010 WOLB with talk in the day and soul at night.